Hello and welcome to the Chthonia Monday live stream. I'm Breachberg, and as you can see, I'm filming from upstairs again. I think a lot of people like my downstairs view, but it's quite cold down there right now. The heat rises, and it's brighter in here. I have actually covered more windows down there, so I think that that's part of the reason that it's just much colder at this time of year, because the temperature's pretty much what it's supposed to be, but I've just been kind of lazily saying, you know what, I have this set up for my live stream on my other channel that I do every morning, and I thought let's just leave it up here for right now, though I am eventually going to have to move things. So let's get into updates first, and then we'll kind of move our way into the topic that I have for today. And as always, I always say we'll see whether or not this takes an hour, whether it takes less than an hour. Generally, when I think it's going to take less than an hour, it takes more than an hour. So, we'll see how far we get with it. I have, so with Chthonia, a lot of things are kind of the same. We just had a podcast released today on the Loireag, which is one of my patrons pointed out, sounds a lot like Lorax. All I think of is Dr. Seuss. And to be honest, while I was actually recording the podcast, I kept thinking of the Lorax also. So I completely can identify with that. And the subject of the kind of topic that I have for today to kind of expand on comes from out of that podcast. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Chthonia books still on sale, fiction still on sale. I have known people who told me they want to buy them, and then I haven't heard from anybody yet. And of course, or not. It's kind of not recently. So all of those, check out chthonia.net/publications. Look through and see which titles, which descriptions interest you. And there should be, if it's one of the ones that's on sale, there should be a link to buy the individual title from me. And all titles from me, like I said, this is USA only because it's got it's $5 for the book plus $5 shipping. So, if you're internationally, I think there might be some people internationally who want it, but the shipping would be a lot higher. And you might, especially if you're in Europe, you might incur extra costs just for me sending it to you. I remember somebody in London ended up with one of my books once, and at one point, even sending it UPS was like $95 for a $20 book. It was like, what the... So I'm really balk at sending things internationally just for that reason, unfortunately. I know in Canada, I think the postal strike's still going on. I don't know if that's ended. But in any case, it does make things kind of... it kind of makes it... anything outside the USA, shipping from my house is more difficult. You're actually better off if you can... you're actually better off if you can just... as much as a lot of people don't like Amazon now, if you're in another country, either that or ordering it through your local Blackwells, Foyles, whomever. It's in Ingram, and they are a worldwide distributor, so they could potentially order the titles for you in the UK if you wanted to get them there. So, UK, or actually anywhere else. It is, like I said, this is internationally distributed, most of my books, except for Archetype Possession, which is one that you have to buy through Amazon because it was produced as a CreateSpace book. It was just kind of like I took some of my stories that have been published elsewhere and threw them together in a collection. Very good collection, I might add, but that one is only available on Amazon. But the other ones you can get through any other distributor. So, so that's still going on. I have this podcast that, like I said, I did today. ISFM, yes, we do have commitments from all the previous faculty to teach again spring 2025. I may have said that on Thursday, and I should be putting that schedule together. Also, this is new since last Thursday. I do have the complete 2025 podcast list done, and it was posted to Patreon this past week, and I will be sharing it with everybody else here over the next couple of days so everybody can see what's upcoming in 2025 that we're going to be talking about. And it used to be that I would make the list and do them in a certain order. And now I feel like last year I think I did the Christian mystics first, because there were people who want me to do female Christian mystics. I started the year with that, and then I went into some more seasonal deities. So, for example, the goddess Breege I discussed on Breege's Day, which is February 2nd, like around that time. So sometimes I try to make them timely, like the ones I'm doing this month are more connected to winter or to Christmas holidays or Yule holidays or things like that. So I try to kind of stay seasonal, but it doesn't always work out depending on who's on my list. I did get a lot of great suggestions from Patreon, and I also got a lot from, I got a few from YouTube as well. People have reached out to me and said, oh, hey, can you do this one? So yeah, all those have ended up on my list for next year. So about half my list was requests. So I want to say thank you to the people who made the requests, because some years it's hard for me to get requests from people, and this year I got quite a lot. So yeah, and there's still some remasters that need to come. Now, at this point, I'm past trying to, I'm past the point of trying to tell people, oh, the remasters are going to be back up again by this date or in a month or like this. Because I'm finding that every time I do that, there's something that happens that keeps me from being able to do that. So, welcome. So, yeah, I had, I have this very much, so I've got quite a few things to be doing with Chthonia, and right now I'm just about keeping up with the podcasts and with the Patreon extras, because I want, people are paying every month to be a member of this channel or be a member of Chthonia. I don't like it when I slip into a mode of neglecting Patreon for other stuff, because occasionally, like if I get very busy on the coaching side of things, I might slip on getting updates and stuff over there. So I'm trying to make sure that I'm conscious of that and trying to keep up with it. The other thing is that's what's new. Okay, so we did the ISFM, we did Chthonia books, we did the podcast. Generally in life, people might know me, I'm cleaning this house out. I mean, you won't necessarily know from looking, but I have gotten rid of a lot of furniture. I've gotten rid of, whole loads of old DVDs, CDs, things like that. Even my old cassette tapes, which a little bit heartbreaking, but at the same time, I'm like, I don't necessarily have the technology anymore. I'm not sure half these things even work anymore if I did have the technology. And some of them I've gone through and I'm like, okay, these were TV shows I taped a long time ago and I don't care about. So, I mean, I threw a lot of stuff away. And I had a big dumpster brought to the house, and they carted it off last Friday. And I've also, as it turned out, Saturday was hazardous waste pickup. Well, not pickup, but everybody goes to the county complex twice a year to drop off their hazardous waste, which I think is weird. I mean, it's weird and not weird. I don't know why they don't just have a regular facility to drop that off, because that's why this stuff has been sitting in my basement for ages. And so finally I got an email. I was like, okay, screw it. I'm just going to go tomorrow and take care of it. Even though I have other things to do. Like, it's end of term for the university. I've got papers to grade. I have a whole stack of religion papers I have to grade after this. Plus, I have 2 videos I have to record for my other channel where I do tarot readings and stuff. I got 2 more to do for that, and I got to upload all that. Plus, I have just downloaded a whole bunch of live stream stuff that I got to upload over to YouTube as well. So it's been very, very busy. Plus, we've got these winter holidays coming up. Now, I don't particularly celebrate Christmas, but my family certainly does. People do buy gifts for each other. This is a kind of year where people I haven't talked to, that's when I get cards and you hear from people and stuff. So I'm trying to keep up with that as well. I feel like I'm ages behind on it. And actually, one of the things I threw in the dumpster was almost all of my Christmas decorations, because I was just like, I don't care anymore. Bye. Just ditched everything. Just threw it in. I kept a few little things here and there, but I'm really just not... the whole goal is to be moving overseas, or at least, and that might mean selling this house to have to go do that, which is as my sister said, that's going to leave you kind of untethered. But I mean, obviously, I can use her address, and I might be able to keep a couple things at her house. And I have had people in the UK and stuff say, oh, if you're coming over here, because I'm going to be looking to enroll to become a licensed therapist and take a full-time course. Or at least one that provides a student visa to go live, work, and do clinicals over in the UK. So that's what the goal is right now. I've got some programs in mind that I'm going to apply to. I have the psych background, but I'm not a therapist. So I'm going to be moving in that direction. So that is part of the reason for the big clean out. It's just like, okay, if this is coming, everybody I know who's had to move abroad, and even me just traveling and living abroad for like maybe 5 months at a time, it's like, yeah, it's a big ordeal, and you really can't take a lot with you. It's very expensive to transport things and to shift it, internationally. So, so I have just been kind of overwhelmed with a lot of stuff, and some days I'm like full of energy, and other days I just want to go back to sleep and just, don't want to deal with anything. But every day there's usually something going on. So, okay, so that's kind of the general updates about me. Oh yeah, and I live in New Jersey, so I don't know if anybody has heard about this on the news, and I was talking about it on my other live stream this morning, but we have what they think are drones that are basically circling like mass swarms of them over New Jersey, over different parts. They started in Morris County, which is just to the east of where I live. That's where I was born, actually. They're having all the towns there, including the towns I used to work in. I'm hearing them all, showing videos and so forth. And I actually posted a video here on Chthonia podcast I saw 6 of them, like, just around my house last night. People are seeing them everywhere, and nobody seems to have an explanation. And as somebody said, yeah, the FBI knows what they are. They're asking people to monitor, they're asking people to send video in, but I'm like, there's no way, that's what somebody said, there's no way they could not know what they are, but they're not telling us what they are. So people don't know if it's like reconnaissance type stuff, or if it's something weirder. I mean, they just did a joint session in Congress on UAPs with the Pentagon, and it basically is because of what's going on in New Jersey. And I'm like, well, are they UAPs? Are they drones? Like, what are they? Because they're not the size of a typical drone. I mean, I've seen drones. I'd gotten a drone in the post. I had gotten it from Amazon. I got an Amazon delivery, and I'm like, what is this? I wouldn't order a drone. I have no reason to have one. This was a few years ago now. And the name on it was some guy's name. I'm like, who's this guy? Like, I don't think this person's ever lived in this house, that I live in now. I've owned this house for quite a number of years now. And like, and when I looked the guy's name up just to see, it was like, he seemed like he was connected with Rutgers University, which is over in New Brunswick. But I'm like, why would you give my address I still don't know what that was about. But when I called Amazon, they said, oh, well, just keep it. I'm like, well, what am I going to do with it? So I literally just donated it to Habitat for Humanity, because I donated a whole bunch of crap too. And I gave it to the guy, I said, do you take these? He's like, yeah, we take them. He's like, and it'll be on the news tomorrow night. But the thing is, that's a small drone. It's like this big. These drones in the sky are like the size of a car. And as somebody pointed out, and they stay sometimes in one spot, or they will kind of move around a certain area for hours. And as somebody pointed out, what kind of batteries do those drones have if they can stay up in the air that long? And nobody seems to know where they're landing or where they're coming from. Supposedly one crashed the other night, and the police went to go retrieve it, and they said nobody could find it. So, and this was in like the mountains, because we have some mountains that are kind of remote here, and it was like, somebody said, so people were sending their videos in, like, you have those little local nextdoor.com and things. So people are showing their videos, and I mean, I could report all these things to the FBI, but kind of like, for what? Like, what are they doing? They're not doing anything other than for them to track what's going on. But I don't understand why, with all the military capabilities we have, and we do have an Air Force base in this state, in the southern part of the state, and I know there's the arsenal up north, but again, and there are drones around there, but there are drones around lots of stuff. There's no reason for... They're in places where it's like, why would they be there if they're looking for something? It doesn't make... I don't know. It's an extremely weird situation, and it's a bit unsettling when every time you step outside, there's like these things flying over your house, and they're pretty close too. They're not as high up, because people are saying, oh, it's just airplanes. I'm like, no. I live in the Newark Airport flight path. Like, I can see when they go back and forth. These are bigger, and they're lower, and they're like right here. They're just like right at the rooftop, at the treetops. So, and I don't know. I'm not even sure that they're drones. Some of them make noise, some of them don't. I don't know if they're all even the same thing. Some of them apparently have wings, some of them don't. They don't. I mean, some of them look a little bit like drones I've seen, but they're the big, like, $20,000 drones that they use for certain... I don't know. There's probably certain other surveying purposes, or I think they were saying like the drones that like do deliveries, like I don't know if it's like Instacart and stuff. They're as big as that, if not bigger. And those are very, very expensive drones. So you're not talking about drone hobbyists like walking around, just controlling them. I mean, again, they're up there for hours, and that's why I'm suspicious that they're not drones at all. Not mind you, I don't know. I don't know what they are. I have some, there's some different things that are floating around, some different theories and so forth. But from looking at them, I'm like, okay, I sit there and watch the skyline out here all the time just because I like to. It's nice to watch the sun come up in the morning. There's the graveyard right there. And I've never seen these things around before. It's been probably since about mid-November that I've seen them in this kind of quantity. So anyway, that's my drone update. And it is strange, and it'll be interesting to know either what official explanation is eventually provided, because right now the only thing we're being told is, well, there's no threat to the public. Okay. Well, what does that mean? So how do you know there's no threat to the public? Like, tell us more. And apparently all the mayors of a lot of the local towns have gotten together, especially in Morris County, and said, look, we want an answer here. We don't want to just don't worry about that. Like, what's going on, And I don't like to, I don't want to become a conspiracy theorist here, but this is just a very bizarre thing. And it's one of those things where I figured, well, whatever it is, the government will have a handle on it, or the military will have a handle on it within a week, and nobody seems to know what's going on. So it makes me wonder, okay, is it that you legitimately don't know, you don't know how to handle it? Or is this something that's not a drone? And why are you allowing it into restricted airspace? Because everything, like we have a reservoir, that's restricted airspace. Trump's golf course is about half an hour from here. That's restricted airspace now. The Arsenal, obviously, is restricted airspace. So these things are flying in all this restricted airspace, or are they the ones doing it and not telling? I don't know. Anyway, it has taken up probably far too much of my brain space in the last few days, but they're always around at night. And I have skylights, so it's like they're just always around. So anyway, it looks like okay, it's heard an odd noise behind me. It sounded like my phone, but my phone's in front of me. Okay, so all those updates aside, let me talk a bit about the topic that I had for today. So the podcast that I just put out this morning, unless you're on Patreon and got it yesterday, is on is on a figure called the Loireag. Now, the Loireag is described as in the main source that I had for this, which was actually more of an aggregation of other sources. It was called. She referred to as a spinster water fairy. That was the term that was used. Now, I don't know if spinster is being used, what sense that term is being used. Because spinster has a lot of connotations. Now, obviously, this is a fairy that's associated with all the different levels of the process of spinning and weaving and doing it according to traditional methods. And we're talking about a fairy being that's from the Scottish Highlands. Okay, the Hebrides, the islands, there's the Inner and Outer Hebrides off the Scottish coast. This seems to be associated with that area. And as I mentioned, she's a fairy that oversees the process and it's usually women who are doing the weaving. Not only the actual weaving itself, because apparently they make this web, and I have no idea how to do any kind of weaving, but apparently the group of them, warp, and they're making this after they've spun the thread, they're making this web of, as part of the weaving, that needs to be thick enough to, I guess, become cloth. Now, again, I don't know. I'm no expert in weaving. I've never learned it. It seems fascinating. It seems like one of those things I would love to learn. I had a spinning wheel at one point ages ago, but I never learned to spin. I mean, that would be kind of a cool thing to do, but it can be a very expensive hobby in an area like this. We did have a place in Frenchtown that was called the Spinnery, and I don't know if it's still there, for people who actually had spinning wheels and wanted to learn to spin. So I had ended up with an antique one from what they call an itinerant spinning wheel from the mid-1800s, and it had like a little wooden peg in it so that you could take the wheel out and kind of take it apart and put it in your pack, you know. And I ended up selling it to a girl down in Maryland who was learning to spin, and I put it up on eBay, and that was a time when I was comfortable just getting in a car and driving to Maryland. 3-hour drive, I think. Was it round trip? Was it 3 hours? Or maybe it was 3 hours one way and back. I can't remember. But I left early in the morning and I was home by afternoon, I seem to remember. And met her at a rest stop on 95. But in any case, so that was that. And I showed this morning in my picture, I showed this little guy. I've never actually named this little pony, but it is a little Shetland pony. And this was from the kind of folk museum that was on the Shetlands on the island of Fetlar. I had gone up, the reason I was up in the Shetlands was back in 2014. I was at a conference, and it was on the supernatural and folklore and literature. And I was presenting at this conference. And those of us who were part of the group, we stayed up on the island of Unst, which is north of Fetlar. And it's the northernmost island. I think it's actually the northernmost point in the UK. Is actually on Unst. And in fact, it's like some kind of a little church or cathedral. I remember going up there. But we stayed in a place called Saxavord, these little cottages, and food was brought in for us into the cottages and it was way too much food. We were there for like a week, and it was like enough food to last like an army for like 6 months. It was like, whoa, we don't need this much food. But there were 3 of us, like 3 people per house. And I ended up staying with this girl from the Czech Republic, and then there was an older Indian gentleman who I eventually did. He is the one who was the editor of De Natura Fidei, which is about the nature of religion, and he's the head of an English department, though, in, I'm not sure I'm going to say it right, Hyderabad in India. So the 3 of us, we were kind of weird, it's like that could be a sitcom, you know, there was an unlikely trio of people living there. But he was a very nice man, he was very respectful, and, you know, and Dr. George, and he had said, you know, he had reached out to us to, you know, I made a lot of connections in terms of publishing when I was on that particular conference. But when we went down to the museum, the reason I liked this little horsey was because, and the Shetland ponies are freaking adorable, they're everywhere, and they, you know, you can walk right up to them. They stick their face in your pocket. They're worse than goats. They like want to eat everything. And I had so this one I had gotten, and basically you see it's got the tartan, but they said this little horsey was okay. The wool was spun from the Shetland sheep. Okay, so they did the spinning process. Then they created and made the cloth, and they dyed the cloth. And then they cut, and then they made the pattern for this, and, you know, they put the little eyes on and all this little stuff. In short, this is literally handmade, and it's stuffed with the sheep's wool from the Shetland sheep. So it's literally handcrafted start to finish in the Shetlands according to that process, and it's every bit of it. It's not like they bought the cloth somewhere and did this, or got it. They actually made the cloth, spun the thread and did everything. So this is. So it's an interesting little guy here, and that's one of the reasons that I keep this. I have this, and you can see I have Grumpy Cat over on my bed, but those are the only 2 ones that I have that you would consider to be stuffed animals that I actually own anymore, and that's, you know, but this one I keep because it really is kind of a folk artifact, and it is very much relevant to the idea of the Loireag here, because not only in the spinning process did the women have to do things in a certain way, but there was also, they would sing while they did it. And the singing was an important part of the process, which I always thought was really interesting. It's like, okay, and if a woman sang the same song twice, apparently the Loireag would get very annoyed, and then that's when they would be, if they were doing whatever they were making their web, it would thin out and they wouldn't be able to use it, and they'd have to start all over again with whatever it is they were doing. Or if a woman had a very shrill voice, or her voice was too loud, or she was out of tune, like the Loireag would take out her wrath on that woman. And the Loireag, of course, is described as a plaintive little thing. So she's considered to be a tiny little fairy, but very cunning, very sharp, and very, and it's interesting because she has the characteristics of what became associated with the idea of the spinster. Now, I was kind of interested in that whole idea because spinster literally initially meant woman who spins, wool into thread or whatever. That's literally what the term referred to, and it was originally. I think they said the first time that the term was used in the Middle Ages was in Piers Plowman, where a woman was referred to as a spinster. But it's referring to the woman who sits there with the wheel and is spinning. Like she's a spinster, in the same way that somebody might be a haberdasher or somebody might be, I don't know, whatever your job is. It's like when you're named for your job. And later on, apparently, what happened with this term is that it became a legal term for an unmarried woman, because the women who did the spinning were typically unmarried women who would do that. So then there became this association between women who were not married and women who did spinning, which I think is interesting, because as I mentioned too about the Loireag is a water fairy. And water fairies tend to have, they have there's usually two different varieties. There's the ones that have a softer side. And actually, they will say that I've seen the Loireag kind of put into this category, although I don't know if she's really soft, or to me she seems more like, she's kind of watching over to make sure you're doing it right, because spinster was all, you also think of like the old school marm, or like you have this idea and this association, and I'm going to go through what all of them are, but so when they talk about her being a spinster water spirit, and that's what I'm saying, that being a water spirit to me implies that the Loireag lives in the water, and I'm like, well, does she live in the water? And again, one of my patrons had said, well, I think that water, that there's something about water that's part of the weaving process, that's part of the making process. So maybe that's the connection. I'm not 100% sure. But typically, water fairies tend to be associated either with, like I said, this kind of like the Selkies that we had talked about, that tend to be kind of these seductive women who could be companions in a way. These beautiful women, or like mermaids or things. Sorry, somebody tried to call in the middle of the live stream. Somebody I actually do want to talk to, but not in the middle of the live stream, so I'll have to call her after. So anyway, it's the first time that's ever happened. Okay, spinsters. So we don't know whether the reference there for the Loireag has to do with whether it has to do with the calling her a spinster because she's a fairy that spins, or whether the other connotations of spinster also seem to apply. Because we don't necessarily think too much about fairies like getting married and things, although we do hear, again, like we did with the Selkies, a human man might take her as a wife, might take one of the women as a wife, or there may be intermarriages between fairies themselves, but we don't necessarily hear, like fairy kings and queens, for example. We don't necessarily hear a whole lot about it. So I don't know if the marital status connotation of spinster applies to the Loireag or not. But nonetheless, the idea that a woman who spins, the other term that's often used for spinster is old maid, okay? And it's a card game too, isn't it? Old maid. And the idea is that, so if we think of maid or maiden as being someone who represents someone who's virginal or young, like now, for example, the way the Wiccans will talk about, what is it usually? Virgin, maiden, crone. Maiden seems to imply a woman who has some kind of sexual maturity, or somebody who is capable, like if you're a virginal girl, if I think about Kore versus Parthenos versus Gine, for example, in the Greek. Kore being kind of a young girl, Parthenos being a girl, who's in her sexual bloom, whether she's sexually active or not. And then, and Parthenos is the term, by the way, the biblical term, when Isaiah, they talk about the virgin shall be with child, the term they're using is Parthenos rather than Kore. So Parthenos implies, it doesn't imply whether the girl in question is a virgin or not. It's simply assumed that if she's unmarried, that she is, right? Given the whole thing around bride prices and the different rules around female sexuality from that perspective. So when one is an old maid, it's the idea that you are in the maiden phase of things, but you're an older person. You're more like the crone age, right? You're older. And so the idea is that the implication there is that you're somebody who has never been sexually active or never been in a married relationship. And whether, or not one or the other is implied there, again, it's kind of a blurred line, but generally it's assumed that a spinster is a woman who's always remained unmarried and not involved in anything sexual. And spinsters tend to have a reputation. It's usually considered now a derogatory term, because if you call a woman a spinster, the implication is not only that she's old and has never had sex, they've never gotten laid, there's the implication of that, but as a result, there's also the suggestion that she would be somebody very moralistic, very repressed, and very judgy. Somebody who kind of, looks down their nose on you and is judging you and wants to ban all pornography and wants to do this and that. Like that's the association we have with the idea of spinster or old maid. Like that's been the negative connotation. So this leads to a really interesting way of thinking, and the fact that this is connected to women who spin, that the legal term ends up, that spinster ends up being the legal term for an unmarried woman, and then it later tends to have this sexual connotation that's almost, I don't even necessarily want to say it's frigid type, but that it's something where the woman somehow has just remained a virgin her entire life and has never engaged in that activity. And so it's, that's what they say, woman who's kind of unappealing, judgy, repressed. And the way that the term changed is apparently spinster was used, I feel like it was something that they said that it was more by the 19th century that they had this other connotation of it as being derogatory if you referred to a woman as a spinster. So that led me to think about some other terminology that's connected to that, because I think it's interesting that a woman's a term associated with a woman's occupation would later on also, or as I mentioned in the podcast, how weaving is a very feminine thing, also becomes associated with her sexual status or her marital status. And I started thinking about the other terms that we tend to use, which are master and mistress, which are Mr. and either Ms., Miss, Mrs., or Ms., respectively. And so I started to go down a little bit of the rabbit hole of what are the origins of those terms. And notice how interesting it is that for men there's one term, Mr., right? And now, unless you're called doctor or professor, it's what I said. If you don't have one of those designations, generally you're, Miss, Ms., Mrs., Mr. You take on one of those titles, I guess is what they refer to it as. But women have 3 and men have 1. And so what are the difference between Ms., Mrs., Miss, Mrs., and Ms? Okay, and I say them in that order for a reason. So there was an article I found. Now this is from Cambridge University. They have this article called, and let me see if I can get the name of it up here. Mistress, Miss, Mrs., or Ms., The Untangling the Shifting History of Titles. Okay, and this is from Dr. Amy Erickson. Okay, she wrote this in the autumn 2014 issue of History Workshop Journal. And so what she talks about here, he talks about the way in which this title it was originally used. And so she said, she was talking about the idea of the mistress of the Queen's music. Okay, that's a particular title, most particular royal titles. And she says, when the role Master of the King's Music was created in 1626, the words master and mistress were direct equivalents. Today, mistress carries multiple connotations, one of which the Daily Mail alluded to in a headline asking if Weir might be the Queen's first music mistress. Okay, so you're talking about this as its equivalent term. And she said, she talks about the forms of female address emerged from the study of women's employment before the advent of the National Census in 1801. What she found in registers, record, and archives led her to question assumptions and track changes that have taken place in the history of titles. She says, few people realize that mistress is the root word of both Mrs. and Miss, just as Mr. is an abbreviation of master. The ways that words are derived from mistress have developed their own meanings and quite shifts, and they can tell us a lot about the changing status of women. So, okay. Now, originally, the term Mrs. replied to anybody, married or unmarried. Mrs. just was short for mistress. Okay. Now, in the 1755 Samuel Johnson Dictionary, he says, a mistress is, he gives 6 possible definitions. And these are instructive. First, a woman who governs, correlative or to subject or servant. So she's the mistress of something. A woman who oversees something or oversees, the staff or whatever is considered to be the mistress of something. Number 2, a woman skilled in anything. Number 3, a woman teacher. 4, a woman beloved and courted would be known as mistress. 5, a term of contemptuous address. Or 6, a whore or concubine. It's quite a range for the term mistress. And, now if we use the term mistress, we often are referring to it as, it tends to have those kinds of almost the idea of prostitution, or certainly at least of the other woman, the man's mistress, right? You have your mistress, there's your wife, and then there's your mistress, right? There's this kind of connotation. So it's really interesting the way in which this becomes like this, and that and they say it was probably the first time you saw the split, according to this, was in the 17th century. It says Miss was adopted by adult women for the first time in the middle of the 18th century. Okay. Before that, Miss was only used for girls in the way that Master is only ever, today increasingly rarely, used for boys. And if you read kind of Victorian literature, they may refer to, Master, so-and-so, referring to the boy of the house. But Miss was always for the little girls. So Miss tends to be a diminutive kind of a thing. It kind of grew into being something like the French mademoiselle, which has actually been outlawed in some places for it being used. So Miss becomes, you would originally have to refer to a girl, which is why I think also nowadays women don't want to be referred to. Really, women don't want to be referred to nowadays by indicators of marital status. Like if somebody calls my house and they're making an appointment and they refer to me as Mrs. Burke, I get very annoyed because I'm not Mrs. Burke. But no, I'm not. I'm not. That's the other thing too. When you are Mrs., more often than not, you are taking the name of the spouse, the name of the man in the equation. So, when I was married, they would refer to me, you're Mrs. Michael O'Brien, right? That's, ages ago when I was married. I don't have my own name. I'm like the property of my husband. And that's why women don't like that, because it's like, it's one thing to say Mr. and Mrs., so-and-so, but a lot of people don't, and a lot of people don't want to take the spousal name anymore either. They're saying, no, I'm not, I don't particularly have a feeling about that one way or the other, just personally, but if I was married to somebody, I probably would at least hyphenate my name, but, I don't, but I understand the idea of you don't just become, like a headstones. I always see you'll see a headstone for a woman and she's only referred to as wife of, and then her husband's name is there. It's like she doesn't really have that much of an identity outside of her spouse. But Mrs. actually, or they said initially the idea of mistress was somebody who had social status, just like master. It implied somebody who was of the aristocracy, married or not, that they had this kind of status. So they had this title. And then eventually over time, and it says, yeah, she's saying, until the 19th century, most women did not have a prefix before their name. Mrs. and later Miss were restricted only to those of high social standing. So there's an economic or aristocratic kind of element to using those titles as well. That they're supposedly only used, or at least in a certain period of time, they were only used for people of a certain rank. So, but you could have women on bottom rungs were simply addressed by their names. Thus, in a large household, the housekeeper might be Mrs. Green, while the scullery maid was simply Molly, and the woman who came to do the laundry was Tom Black's wife or Betty Black. You know what I mean? Like, there was no title there. So they said, historians have long known that Mrs. indicated social status, but they normally assume it also shows that the woman was married. So they wrongly concluded that women like Samuel Johnson mentions his friend Elizabeth Carter as Mrs., but she was not somebody who was married. And but there is the implication that marriage accords you a certain status. And certainly if you deal with tax laws and things, there's still a truth to that. Sometimes people get married for tax reasons or for legal reasons. Because it accords them more status and more privilege to have that, even in today's society. And this is also why, why gay marriage is a thing, why people want to be able to get married, because if you're in a state where you're not able to do that, you may not have as many benefits as a single person than if you are a married person. I do know that certainly seems to be true in Ireland. I remember somebody was telling me that they had so many issues going in and out of Ireland when they were dating somebody in Ireland, but once the two of them got married, she goes, the way that they treated me was completely different. once I was Mrs. So and now all of a sudden it's like you're a person. And and it seems to me like it's as of the 19th century you started to have this distinction between Mrs. and Miss. And Miss just being used for anybody who was unmarried was known as Miss. And because this is almost associated with something childish, the implication is almost that as a single female or sovereign female, you're also like a child. Which again kind of gets around to that weird sovereignty thing that either you belong to your father or to your husband. You're Miss so-and-so, and it's usually your family name, which is usually your father's last name, right? I mean, maybe today, not always, and then when you get married, it's like you have your husband's name. And these conventions are just very interesting, but they're still what we go by. Like on my passport, like again, technically I'm doctor, but on my passport, I don't even want to go there because then somebody's going to think like I'm a medical doctor or something. Ms. is fine. And Ms. became more of a thing that was used in, I think they said actually, we always think of Ms. as being associated with the 70s, with like Gloria Steinem and Ms. Magazine and all of that, and the feminist movement, the women's lib movement of the 70s. But they said it actually first came into use in the 1950s. So that's interesting as well, because Ms. tries to take out all the letters in between, I guess, and make it more ambiguous as to whether or not what your status is. In other words, it became a term that says, I don't want to be identified by my marital status. My title shouldn't be, or how I'm known or identified in society shouldn't be based on in relation to the person I'm with. Because as I've noted, men are always referred to as Mr. You're Mr. So-and-so, there's no Mr. And then if you're married, it's, it's got some other kind of a thing connected to it. But for the same word, being they both derive from one word, master and mistress, okay? Which, I don't know, now sounds, well, anyway. The way we might use those, other ways we might use those terms today. But that's where they derive from. And now they're a term applied to anybody. I mean, it's not like you have to belong to a certain economic class to be referred to as Mr. or Mrs. or Miss or Ms. But I just think it's interesting that for women, it tends to be, there's so much this thing, just like the term spinster, there's a lot about women's identity that ends up centering around their relationship to somebody else. And so interestingly, it kind of almost gets back to ideas about sovereignty, or about associations that we have with the feminine, and the way in which we might become uncomfortable with a sovereign feminine, because the idea is that the feminine in some way is has to exist in relation to something else, that it doesn't exist on its own. I mean, I don't know if this goes back to the biblical mythology of the West that says that Eve comes out of, is made from the rib of Adam, right? You're an extension of your spouse in some way. And again, there's nothing that's really been said about that, but if we think about the psychological or the mythological associations with the way that we think about that, or the way that we think about those roles. And even if you want to back up and get to the whole idea of the woman, I mean, and nowadays it's increasingly a thing where women are on their own, where they choose not to be married, or if they're divorced, they may not remarry, or just may never want to choose a life of marriage and children at this point. It's a lot more common now than certainly, even I would say even in the last 20, 30 years, it was still a thing. I mean, I grew up I was a child in the 70s, I was a teenager in the 80s, and I was in college, grad school, etc. and for most of the 90s, and then I was married in the 90s as well. And in the 2000s, so point being that from that period of time, I was raised with the expectation that, maybe I could become a teacher, maybe I could go to secretarial school. I mean, you want to talk about sexist kind of ways of assuming what you're going to do. I mean, I guess I did become a teacher in a way, but not a teacher of little children, but that also that you were going to become a wife and a mother. I mean, that was it was literally talked about like that's a foregone conclusion. If you're a female, if you own a uterus, that's what's happening to you. That's where your life's going. And so I think, but even a lot of my friends I know, it's just kind of like, okay, well, you're in school, you're going to college, that was, again, it wasn't a foregone conclusion when I was younger that you were going to go to college. I'm from a family where there were 2 boys and 3 girls, among the children. There were 5 of us total. 1 from my father's first marriage, was my oldest brother, and then the rest of us. And nobody went to college or university except me. I'm the only one, and I went the whole freaking 9 yards. I mean, it's like I'm not going to get a bachelor's. I'm going to get a couple of master's degrees, then I'm going to get a doctorate, and I'm going to go. And so I went did the whole thing. But the assumption was always made that that's not, and I always feel like within the family structure, there's certain people who, even though they may not come right out and say it, there's just certain things they'll say to me. It's like, yeah, I can't understand why you wouldn't want to have children. I don't understand why, you're doing this. Or, oh, I think it's a shame that you didn't. And I'm like, you know what I mean? There's the implication there still. The idea and the attitude is still there that single femaleness is somehow an aberration. And these kinds of titles and associations that we have with occupations of women or the titles of women within a social structure, again, whatever they may literally mean in society, because someone will always say, oh, well, it doesn't always have to mean this or that. No, it doesn't. But what are our automatic associations with those things? People see that I'm a certain age and they assume that I'm Mrs. And I'm like, no, I'm not Mrs. I'm not a spinster by that definition either, but I guess I'm a divorcee, right? I guess that's what they would call me. But I'm like, I'm not, but by the same token, I don't know. I mean, why is there a definition at all that's based on, we talk about, when I did my piece for the ISFM on feminine life cycle initiations, I pointed out that most initiations, both male and female, are based around sex. They are based around sex and sexuality. Your milestones are based on when your body changes to be able to bear children or to create children. That's almost like the big human milestone. And then, of course, if you have a family, there's milestones connected to that. Like if you get married, if you have children, there's rituals around children and all that kind of stuff. And then when you get older, it's interesting. I mean, some societies, I think, do have certain kinds of rituals, or at least the expectation of certain things that that someone will do when they reach a certain age. But, you know, I think that's kind of what we need. We kind of need like a midlife milestone, right? We need a thing. And it's interesting, but it's interesting how much of our social status, and this is even our economic and legal status, ends up being defined by sex or defined by relationship. Men don't have that kind of thing, because whether a man is single or married, he's Mr. It doesn't change who he is. A woman being married changes who she is. And that's what I find interesting. Or a woman's choice not to be married also says something about who she is. Whereas the man who doesn't get married, he's the eligible bachelor or the eternal bachelor. Oh yeah, he's just a man of the world. He wants to go travel around. Like, these were the kinds of things that were said. Or they could, a man could be like, oh, I'm going to go join the military, and I'm not going to, I'll wait to get married, or or maybe they never will. And nobody ever looks at that. Nobody bats an eye at that. They're just like, yes, well, he just lives a very comfortable bachelor life. And while so many women would probably want to have him, he's going to be on his own. And but with a woman, it's literally looked at almost like, what's wrong with you? Why are you single? And I think it can be a hard thing to understand unless you've lived that way. I mean, I'm at a point in my life where I don't care what people think of the fact that I did not remarry after I got divorced. Like, I don't care what people think about it. Because my feeling is, and you do, depending on where you are. And I mean, having traveled in different places around the world, maybe one of the reasons I like England better than Ireland, which I know is controversial for some people, is that in Ireland, I find that the fact that I'm a single woman, there's an implicit judgment about me by a lot of people there. Oh, you're this age and you're not married and you're not pushing a pram and you're not doing this. I mean, the looks I would get from people was almost like, hey, who are you walking around by yourself here? Never got that in England. Never have that in England. Nobody cares. It's just like, which is the way I prefer it. It's not really anybody's business. I don't care. I don't. What other people choose is totally fine with me. What I choose should be fine with me, and it shouldn't change the way I'm approached in society. It's just, the assumptions about me should not be based on my marital status. But you have to think about the fact that, and again, maybe this is something that's changing at this point, but, why is that still a thing? And I don't know, because like I said, even in the legal system, it's becoming kind of a thing. And it's interesting because when we look at what's happening, particularly in the USA, that one of the issues that only seemed to be very political was around, for example, transgender identity, LGBTQ, all of that, all of the things that are around issues of people who identify in those communities, whether they're gender fluid, whether they're transgender, whether they're homosexual, whatever the identity is, that's not what people have deemed traditional. Okay. Because obviously this changes the social definitions of things. This says that socially, you can't be put into a box or a category based on your marital status. And it's like it's interesting to see how certain people want to rebel against that and say, well, no, that's somehow ruining America. Well, why is it ruining America? We've obviously discussed dozens of reasons why people might perceive that. I'm not saying it's true. I'm just saying that where unconsciously people are making these kinds of negative associations. But I think this is just another example of how a title that is connected to a woman who is typically unmarried by occupation ends up becoming one of these terms. And again, I'm comparing it to the Mr. and Mistress kind of a thing, because I feel that it says a lot. It tells you a lot about the perception of women and the status of women in society and what their expected roles are supposed to be and how they're perceived if they don't engage with those kinds of roles. And it's almost like anything where the idea of a spinster is just a woman who spins wool now becomes a derogatory term for a woman who has not been married. And the implication is that she's a spinster because somehow she's undesirable, you know? No man came to court her or to pick her up or whatever. And that becomes the association with it. So women who choose not to do that suddenly are, you know, you're very much a, you are somehow like thrown to the side and you're not desirable. So somehow you're not, I don't know, like somehow Sylvia Plath actually did a number of poems that are really harsh. I want to say the one is called, is it Persephone and her sister? There's one that she did about Persephone where she refers to, I mean, like almost the dry, barren, soulless woman who does not bear children and doesn't have a wife versus the one who, decides to marry and have a family. I mean, it's surprising. It seems surprising for Sylvia Plath, given what people, but again, it's how you watch her image and her understanding of the role of women change over time. And there does tend to be an association with that. So therefore, the woman who is unmarried or perhaps chooses not to be sexually active is regarded as, and again, if you're a girl or an adolescent who's not sexually active, yes, that's the way it's supposed to be. If you're an older person who's not sexually active, it's almost like either you're kind of like a dried up prune or you're infantilized in some way. Because if you're referred to as Miss and not Mrs., then there's this implication there that because you are not a sexually active person, that somehow you are a child and need to be treated as such. Which kind of gets back to what I'm saying about, are you owned by your father or are you owned by your husband? Like that kind of idea. So, I don't know. Ideas to just think about and play around with. This was kind of a little rabbit hole I went down. I obviously didn't read this whole article, but yeah, just thinking about the idea of the idea that you have this little fairy who's a spinster, but probably spinster meant in the most traditional sense. I don't think anything about the sexuality of this particular being is discussed anywhere. But she is certainly a stickler for doing things right way and for the proper song, giving the proper song while you do it, and getting very cross with people who don't do things the right way, which is typical of a lot of the household fairies. If you do something that annoys them, they will let you know. And so anyway, check out that podcast. It just came out if you haven't had a chance to listen to it today. It's an interesting little study, and it took me to a place maybe it wasn't totally unexpected for me, but I think I always find it when I do podcasts, I don't have a script pre-written out, just like I don't for these. I mean, I have some notes, and I may read from some things, but I just typically see where the associations carry me. and that's what I do in the podcast. And so that one led me to a very interesting place. So, so I hope you enjoy that one this week. Anyway, we just reached an hour. It's 1:00. And apologies for the little interruption earlier, but, these things happen. And I do hope you guys have a great rest of your week. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it. And I will see everybody next week. So take care.